Welcome to the Monday Monologue. Well, this week I want to talk about component burn-in. And that's something we hear a lot of people talking about. And I just want to kind of give you my thoughts on, burning in audio components, what you can expect, and what I think is nonsense. So let's start with the parts that I feel need the longest burn-in time. And there's only one thing that I really have seen takes a while to burn in, and that's film caps or coupling caps that are used in audio gear. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the science behind it, and I'm not even going to try to pretend to, but I do feel that coupling caps take a pretty good while to burn in. I would say probably about 15 hours or so, maybe 20 hours of music playing through them, not just with the gear powered on, but with music playing through them for them to really kind of chill out and have the sound that they're going to have from then on. I have noticed, depending on the brand of caps, that some of them do sound really bad when you first start listening to them. Those MyFlex caps in particular, they take quite a while for those things to settle down and not be all bright and tinny sounding to really, when they get to richness to them, it takes good 20-25 hours for those things to burn in. The Mundorf aluminum oil caps, I would say maybe 10 hours, 12 hours, something like that of use. They've kind of settled down to probably 95% of what they're going to sound like. They don't sound quite as bright and brittle as those MyFlex caps do, but they do sound a little just not great. They're still a little bright. They don't have a lot of mid-range, and the bass is kind of weak. But then, like I said, after probably 4 or 5 hours, they're starting to kind of warm up, and then after about 12 hours, they're 95% of what they're ever going to be. So the next thing is vacuum tubes. How long do they take to burn in? In my experience, playing music through vacuum tubes in about 4 hours, you've got 90% of what they're ever going to be. Now, I know a lot of these tube manufacturers, especially like these 300B tube manufacturers, will say, oh, it takes 200 hours for the tubes to break in. That's nonsense. They're telling you that so that you don't return the tubes after a couple of days of listening to them because they don't sound good. They want to convince you that you need to listen to those things for like 2 weeks straight. And by that time, you've forgotten what the other tube sounded like that you replaced it with. And so that's just, it's kind of like some of these other components, and we'll get into that in a minute, that have these super long periods of time for break-in. They're hoping you either get used to it or you forget what the other stuff sounded like. And so, or you're outside of the return period, or it's, you've had these for 3 months, there's no return on them now. That's what they're hoping. And so this nonsense of needing 100 or 200 hours for something to break in is just that. It's nonsense. And one of the things that I see a lot of is especially these made in China tube amps, when people talk about, hey, I bought one of these and hooked it up, and man, I've listened to it for a couple of days, it just doesn't sound very good. And then people will reply, oh yeah, you got to listen to them, you got to give them like a month or two to break in before they really start sounding good. That's more just trying to sell people on what you bought and that it's not junk. If this stuff sounds bad after 2 days of playing, it's never going to sound good. And there's no, 2 months of burn-in that's going to fix a bad sounding amplifier. Now, the stuff that really drives me crazy is when people start talking about things like speaker cables and RCA cables, interconnects, or especially like power cables needing to break in before you can hear them. And first of all, and I may get lit on fire for this, you're not going to hear the difference in power cables. That is just snake oil BS that they've sold everybody. Power cable is, as long as the conductors are large enough to conduct the current from the wall socket to the power transformer, there's nothing else going on. First of all, especially in a tube amp, the power transformer is going to isolate anything that's coming through it to the point that you're never going to hear it. Then you've got stages of filters and chokes and other things that are also filtering all this other stuff that could be in the signal out. And the power cord is just going to transmit from what's in the wall. That last 2 feet of cable is ignoring the miles of cable from the power station to your house and then all the wiring in your house. Now, I can see someone that maybe has a bunch of noisy stuff plugged into different circuits in their house, trying to get a dedicated circuit to their wall. But I'm not even convinced that there's anything to that. I think that the power supply in a good amplifier should be able to handle whatever's coming out of the wall. Now, when I build my power supplies, almost all of them have 2 stages of filtration. They at least have the rectifier, capacitor, then a choke, then another capacitor, and then at the very least an RC or a resistor capacitor network after that. And if you're hearing some huge difference plugging in some fancy power cable, then you're powering an amplifier that has a substandard power supply. So that's on power cables. Speaker cables. I think there's so much snake oil out there on speaker cables that it's just unbelievable. And again, it's so easy to convince people. I mean, it started, I think, with those monster cables years ago. And there probably was something to using like those big, fat 12-gauge cables when you had a long run of maybe 10 feet to each speaker, that you don't want the voltage drop that a small conductor cable has. But once that got rolling, it just opened the door for all kinds of crazy interlaced weird cables. And then a problem with a lot of these fancy speaker cables is they sound worse than zipcord because of the capacitance that they put in to the load on the amplifier and the frequency changes that makes. And if you're having to use crazy speaker cables to make your system sound good, you're basically using your speaker cables as a equalizer to attenuate frequencies in your amp in your system, and cables are not the right way to control the frequency response in a system. Now on the interconnects, there is something to the shielding being done correctly. And I've pointed out before, these world's best cables that are directional or as much money as you should ever need to spend on interconnects. They got nice Amphenol connectors, they've got high quality wire, they've got the shielding done directionally where the outer shielding is only connected at the source end of the jack and is open on the other end. And you've seen me talk about that on my channel before when I'm doing shielded cable inside a chassis. Same way they do these cables. And so going from like those super cheapo cables that come with some equipment to like these world's best cables, that is a good move. One thing you do need to be careful with interconnects is when you're connecting a turntable to the preamp that you're not using cables with the wrong capacitance or too high a capacitance, because that can screw up the frequency response curve in the turntable phono preamp deal. So make sure that that's down. I think it's usually about 100 PF is the cables you want to use, and then a 47K impedance on the input of the phono stage is what most moving magnet cartridges want to see. So again, be careful on your interconnects between the phono and the turntable, that you don't introduce too much capacitance there either. And then even these world's best cables come with some ridiculous thing talking about that these RCA cables need to burn in. And it's just nonsense, guys. It's freaking wire. I mean, it can't need, it doesn't make any sense that it would need to be burned in. And I'll put a link here. Go look at this website and look at this ridiculous $25,000 box that they sell for you to burn your cables in. And they claim that it is like preloading software in a computer, the way it burns the cables in. The snake oil that they come up with for audio gear is just unbelievable. I've been involved with motorcycles and the car industry and photography. I've never seen anything like it. It's just some of the most nonsensical stuff, and people buy it. So anyway, I think that's it for this week. Cable burn-in nonsense. Those super high-end speaker cables and stuff, and I'm sure somebody's going to respond, oh my God, I got these cables and it transformed the way my system sounded. It did in their head. It's not the cables. Same with the power cords. It ain't the power cord. It's up here, guys. So anyway, if you're enjoying my channel, please subscribe. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon folks. The link's below if you'd like to help support the channel. Also, a donation link below on my website. Make a donation. Helps me afford stuff like this cool KT120 amp we're working on, which I thought I'd leave in the Monday monologue for this week. And we'll see you for the next Monday monologue.